The truth behind America's most perfect TV couple. A hidden affair that almost destroyed everything is that, in the early 1960s, the Dick Van Dyke Show was one of the most beloved television programs in America. Every Tuesday night at 9:30 p.m., families gathered around their black and white television sets to watch Rob and Laura Petrie navigate the ups and downs of married life in suburban New Rochelle. People tuned in each week to see Rob and Laura laugh, argue, and share sweet family moments that felt remarkably authentic. They seemed like the perfect couple, witty, charming, and genuinely in love. The natural chemistry between Dick Van Dyke and Mary Tyler Moore felt so real, so effortless, that many fans believed they must have been in love off-screen too. But while the cameras captured smiles and laughs, the truth behind the scenes was very different, and much darker than anyone could have imagined. At the time the show premiered, Dick Van Dyke was already married to a woman named Margie Willett. Their love story had begun in the 1940s when Dick was still a struggling performer, working nightclub acts and radio shows for barely enough money to survive. They had gotten married on February 12, 1948, in what would become one of the most unusual wedding ceremonies in entertainment history. Because they couldn't afford a traditional wedding, Dick was making only $50 a week at the time. They decided to tie the knot live on a radio show called Bride and Groom. Millions of listeners across America heard them exchange vows, making their union a public spectacle from the very beginning. Margie Willett was everything Dick wasn't when it came to fame and attention. She was a deeply private, shy woman who cherished quiet moments and simple pleasure. While Dick thrived on making people laugh and being the center of attention, Margie preferred staying in the background, far away from the bright lights and constant scrutiny that came with her husband's growing success. She genuinely hated Hollywood, the phoniness, the parties, the endless networking events where everyone seemed to be performing even when the cameras weren't rolling. She didn't like going to premieres or award shows, and she certainly didn't enjoy being photographed by reporters who were always hungry for the next story. Instead, she focused her energy on what mattered most to her: raising their 4 children, Christian, Barry, Stacy, and Carrie Beth, and creating a warm, stable home environment away from the chaos of show business. But as Dick's fame exploded with the unprecedented success of the Dick Van Dyke Show, the delicate balance of their home life began to crumble. The show wasn't just popular, it was a cultural phenomenon that turned Dick into one of America's most recognizable faces. He was working incredibly long hours, constantly in the public eye, attending meetings, doing interviews, and maintaining the exhausting schedule that comes with starring in a hit television series. The pressure was immense, and Dick began to feel increasingly disconnected from Margie and the life they had built together during their leaner years. They were growing apart, slowly but surely, like two ships drifting in opposite directions. The man who could make millions of Americans laugh every week was finding it harder and harder to find joy in his own home. Dick tried desperately to keep it all together, to be the perfect husband and father that everyone expected him to be, but he was also battling a private demon that threatened to destroy everything he had worked for: alcoholism. Dick's drinking problem began as what many in Hollywood considered normal: a few drinks after work to unwind, cocktails at industry parties, wine with dinner. But gradually alcohol became his way of dealing with the mounting pressure, the stress of maintaining his public image, and the profound emptiness he felt in his personal life. He drank to quiet the voices in his head that told him he wasn't good enough, that his success was just luck, that someday everyone would realize he was a fraud. No one in the public knew about his struggle. On screen and in public appearances, he still danced with infectious energy, smiled with genuine warmth, and made people laugh until their sides hurt. But behind closed doors, in the quiet moments when the performance ended, he was drowned. During this turbulent period in his life, Dick met a woman who would change his world forever: Michelle Traola. She worked as a secretary for his agent, Arthur Park, and from their first meeting, there was something different about her. Michelle was confident where Margie was shy, outgoing where his wife was reserved. She was funny, sharp-witted, and most importantly, she gave him the kind of attention and admiration he desperately craved, but wasn't receiving at home. Michelle understood the entertainment industry in ways that Margie never could or wanted to. She spoke the language of Hollywood, appreciated the pressures Dick faced, and made him feel like the star he had become. She laughed at his jokes, supported his career ambitions, and made him feel alive in ways he hadn't experienced in years. What started as innocent conversations during office visits slowly evolved into long phone calls, private lunches, and eventually clandestine meetings that neither of them could resist. The affair that developed between Dick and Michelle wasn't the dramatic, passionate romance often portrayed in movies. Instead, it was slow, careful, and filled with an overwhelming sense of guilt that ate away at Dick's conscience every single day. This wasn't a man who took marriage lightly, or who enjoyed deceiving the woman he had promised to love and honor. Dick genuinely loved Margie. She was the mother of his children, his partner through the struggling years, the woman who had believed in him when no one else would. But he also felt more alive, more like himself when he was with Michelle. Years later, reflecting on this period of his life, Dick would say that he was writhing in guilt every time he looked at his wife. He described feeling torn between two completely different worlds: the familiar life he had built with Margie, complete with children, traditions and shared history, and the exciting, passionate relationship he had discovered with Michelle, which represented everything he felt was missing from his marriage. The affair continued for 8 agonizing years, 8 years of carefully orchestrated lies, stolen moments, and the constant fear of being discovered. It was 8 years of Dick living a double life that would have destroyed his career and his family if it had become public knowledge. During this time, he had to maintain his image as America's sweetheart, the wholesome entertainer who represented family values and moral decency. Margie, despite her distance from Hollywood, wasn't naive. She began to sense that something fundamental had changed in her marriage. Dick was different, more distant, more irritable, less present even when he was physically home. Their conversations became stilted and formal. The easy intimacy they had once shared seemed to evaporate, replaced by a polite but cold coexistence. They lived in the same beautiful house in Beverly Hills, surrounded by all the trappings of success, but it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage set where two actors played the roles of husband and wife for the benefit of their children, and anyone who might be watching. The emotional toll on both Dick and Margie was devastating. Dick was consumed by guilt, knowing that he was betraying the woman who had stood by him through his darkest day. Margie, meanwhile, felt increasingly isolated and confused, unable to understand why the man she had married seemed to be slipping away from her despite all their success and apparent good fortune. The end of an era. In 1984, after 36 years of marriage, 36 years that had taken them from poverty to wealth, from obscurity to fame, from young dreamers to middle-aged strangers, Dick and Margie finally divorced. The end of their marriage was heartbreaking for both of them, representing not just the failure of their relationship, but the death of their shared dreams, and the family they had worked so hard to build together. They had started with nothing but love and hope, building a life together from the ground up. They had weathered the uncertainty of Dick's early career, celebrated his first successes, and raised 4 children who were now adults with families of their own. But somewhere along the way they had lost each other, and no amount of fame or fortune could bring back what they had once shared. After the divorce was finalized, many people expected Dick to immediately marry Michelle, given that their relationship had been the catalyst for the end of his marriage. But life, as always, was more complicated than that. While Dick and Michelle did continue their relationship, they didn't rush to the altar. Instead, they spent more than 30 years together, building a partnership that was both passionate and turbulent, filled with love but also marked by arguments, jealousy, and the kind of intense emotional drama that comes from a relationship born out of deception and guilt. Michelle Traola had a fascinating and complicated history of her own that made her a perfect match for Dick's complex personality. She had previously lived with legendary actor
Marvin for 6 years during the...
When their relationship ended, Michelle sued Marvin for financial support, claiming that their long-term cohabitation had created a common-law marriage that entitled her to half of his earnings during their time together. The case Marvin became a landmark legal decision that introduced the concept of palimony into American law, and changed how courts viewed unmarried couples' financial obligations to each other. Michelle was strong, independent, intelligent, and completely comfortable with attention and controversy, qualities that both attracted and sometimes frustrated Dick. Their relationship was never boring, but it was also never entirely peaceful. They loved each other deeply, but they also fought passionately, breaking up and reconciling multiple times over the years. Despite the drama, they remained committed to each other until Michelle's death from lung cancer in 2009, a loss that devastated Dick and marked the end of the most significant relationship of his adult life. The professional truth behind the show's end. While all of this personal drama was unfolding behind the scenes, fans of the Dick Van Dyke Show continued to speculate about the relationship between Dick and his co-star Mary Tyler Moore. Their on-screen chemistry as Rob and Laura Petrie was so natural, so effortless, that it seemed impossible they weren't romantically involved in real life. The way they looked at each other, the timing of their comedic exchanges, the genuine affection that seemed to radiate from every scene they shared, surely this had to be more than just great acting. But both Dick and Mary consistently denied any romantic involvement, and their denials were truthful. In fact, Mary once joked in an interview that it was a terrible waste that nothing romantic ever happened between them, but she also made it clear that their relationship had always been purely professional and respectful. They admired each other's talent, enjoyed working together, and developed a genuine friendship that lasted for decades. But there was never any romantic tension or physical attraction between them. Mary Tyler Moore had her own personal struggles that were largely hidden from the public during the show's run. She was battling type 1 diabetes, a condition that required constant management and significantly impacted her daily life. She also suffered multiple miscarriages, and would later experience the unimaginable tragedy of losing her only son Richie in a gun accident when he was just 24 years old. Her personal life included 3 marriages, each bringing its own challenges and disappointment. Like Dick, Mary's life looked perfect from the outside. She was beautiful, talented, successful, and beloved by millions of fans, but behind the scenes, she was dealing with pain, loss, and struggles that would have broken many people. Despite their lack of romantic involvement, Mary always spoke glowingly of Dick's influence on her career and personal development. She credited him with helping her grow as both an actress and a person, praising his generosity as a scene partner, and his willingness to support her comedic instincts, even when it meant sharing or giving up the spotlight. When Mary died in 2017, Dick was devastated, describing her as a bright light in his life, and one of the most talented people he had ever worked with. The final chapter, the real reason the Dick Van Dyke Show ended, had nothing to do with romantic scandals or behind-the-scenes drama. The decision was purely professional and came from the show's creator, Carl Reiner, who felt that after 5 successful seasons and numerous awards, they had told all the stories they could tell effectively. Reiner was a perfectionist who believed in going out on top rather than allowing a beloved show to decline in quality. Dick agreed with this decision, preferring to end the series while it was still at its creative peak, rather than dragging it out until it became stale or repetitive. However, the timing of the show's end coincided with the most difficult period of Dick's personal life. The end of the series left him with more time at home, more silence to fill, and more opportunities to confront the emptiness he felt in his marriage. Without the daily routine of going to the studio, working with people who made him laugh, and losing himself in the character of Rob Petrie, Dick was forced to face the reality of his situation more directly than ever before. Today, Dick Van Dyke is 99 years old, and one of the last surviving legends from television's golden age. In 2012, at the remarkable age of 86, he surprised everyone by marrying again. His new wife, Arlene Silver, was a makeup artist 46 years younger than him, and their relationship initially drew criticism and skepticism from the media and public. But Dick didn't care about the judgment. He said Arlene made him genuinely happy in ways he hadn't experienced in years. They laughed together, sang together, and truly enjoyed each other's company, proving that love and happiness can be found at any age. This story serves as a powerful reminder that life is never as perfect as it appears on television, and that even the people who bring us the most joy can be struggling with their own demons. Dick Van Dyke's journey from small-town dreamer to television icon to flawed human being seeking redemption shows us that real strength lies not in being perfect, but in being honest about our imperfections, and continuing to search for meaning, love, and happiness despite our mistakes.